I was holding a paper plate of store-brand sheet cake when they announced Kyle's reward. For visionary supplier cost reduction, they said, like he'd just solved the Suez Canal crisis with a spreadsheet and a smirk. The applause was polite, almost reluctant. But he stood there beaming like a prom king with a god complex, while HR handed him a glossy envelope. A $13,000 luxury cruise for two, the email read later. Destinations: Barcelona and Mykonos. His wife posted about it before the meeting was even over. Caption: Proud of my brilliant husband. Bon voyage to success. Waterwave bottle with popping cork. Then Linda from admin waddled over to my cubicle, like she was delivering an Oscar. This one's for you, she chirped, dropping a flimsy envelope on my desk like it was radioactive. Inside? A $2 scratch-off ticket and a printed note that said, "Hope you hit it big." Grinning face with smiling eyes, no name. Just that emoji, grinning at me like it knew I'd spent 10 years saving this company millions while Kyle plagiarized my vendor spreadsheets and delivered them with more hair gel and buzzwords. I stared at that ticket for a solid 30 seconds before I slid it into my drawer next to the expired Altoids and broken stylus. Not because I was hurt, but because I was calculating. The game had changed, and Kyle didn't know it yet. By the way, if you're even halfway enjoying this, do us a favor. Only 3% of people who listen actually hit subscribe, and it makes a huge difference. Drop a like too. Keeps this kind of storytelling alive. Alright, back to it. The whole floor was still buzzing from Kyle's win. He strutted around the office like he'd just closed an IPO instead of bullying a vendor into a fake markdown we'd all undo next quarter. Nobody mentioned that it was my decade-long relationship with vendor Delta that even made those price reductions possible. Nobody cared that Frank, the vendor's founder, called me directly when inventory hiccuped, or that I'd helped his son get into Ohio State. Kyle just saw numbers on a slide and treated Frank like he was a vending machine that dispensed 15% discounts on command. That savings he bragged about at Q2? Frank only agreed because I promised to realign forecasts the next cycle. Kyle called it negotiation. I called it debt. But here's the part that stuck with me. The day after that so-called celebration, I caught Kyle in the hallway grinning to himself, humming Jimmy Buffett while adjusting his Rolex knockoff. He leaned against the water cooler like a sitcom extra and said, "Hey, maybe I'll bring the vendor a souvenir from Mykonos. Think they like olive oil and hard truths." Then he laughed. At his own joke. Alone. I smiled back, nodding like I was just so charmed. Inside, I was already drafting an exit. Not from the company, but from this broken chain of leverage he thought he controlled. See, Kyle never bothered to learn how supply chains actually work, or how much influence a deadweight pricing analyst has when she's the only one the vendors trust not to screw them. I didn't rage. I didn't quit. I just opened a blank spreadsheet, titled it Contingency Vendor Path, and started writing a name I already knew. Frank Martin. Owner of Delta Supply. Widower. Proud of his daughter's bakery in Akron. Once told me I was the only suit who ever asked how his week was. Frank had been hinting at stepping back for months, but Kyle never heard it over the sound of his own buzzwords. By Friday, Kyle had forgotten the whole interaction. But I hadn't. I watched him load vacation slides into the Q3 presentation deck, like the Mediterranean was now part of our procurement strategy. I stayed quiet. But that $2 ticket? It never left my drawer. Because that's when I decided it wouldn't be Frank answering his calls next quarter. It would be me. Kyle waltzed into the Monday pricing strategy meeting like he'd just stepped off his cruise ship with Poseidon's approval. Hair slicked, skin bronzed, fake Ray-Bans tucked into his open collar like some washed-up yacht DJ who got lost and stumbled into middle management. He dropped his Q3 cost optimization initiative deck on the conference table like it was gospel. I'd seen it already. He'd sent it out at 5:42 a.m. with the subject line Warpath. His opening line? Time to hammer the vendors again. Especially Delta. We squeezed 10% last quarter. I want 12% this time. I sat there, flipping through the handout like I was impressed. Same recycled color-coded graphs. Same bullshit KPIs. He pointed at a line item like he'd just uncovered buried treasure. "Look at this," he said, tapping the number so hard the ink smudged. Delta's freight costs went down 3%. That's margin, people. And margin means movement. Then he looked straight at me and said it with that smirk. Pull the past 6 quarters of comparative quotes from Delta and their competitors. I want a clean justification for a 12% cost reduction. Have it by Thursday. And none of your relationship disclaimers this time, okay? He did air quotes around relationship, like that word was code for incompetence instead of the reason Frank even took his calls in the first place. I nodded. Sure thing. But that line? The one between strategic silence and being used? It wasn't a line anymore. It was scorched earth. I'd spent a decade helping that vendor weather tariffs, freight hikes, COVID disruptions, and enough regulatory sludge to fill a moat. Frank always played fair. He wasn't the cheapest, but his components never failed, and he never once changed a delivery date without calling me first. Hell, when his wife passed, he sent me a thank you card for the flowers I didn't even sign my name to. And now Kyle wanted to publicly humiliate him for a bonus tier cost shave he didn't earn? I jotted the task down on my notepad. Delta 12%. Fake comparison. But what I was really thinking about was Frank's comment during our last catch-up. One of these days, I'm just gonna pack it up and fish full-time. Let someone else deal with you office people. I'd laughed at the time. But now? Now I wondered how serious he was. As the meeting dragged on, Kyle kept thumping the table like a bad drummer in a bar band. This quarter's about pressure. If they squeal, we're doing it right. Others nodded, eyes glazed over. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked if Delta could absorb that cut without breaking SLA. Nobody but me saw the issue. After the meeting, I stopped by the ladies' room and stared at myself under the cold fluorescent light. 10 years. 10 years of giving a damn while guys like Kyle paraded their ignorance as strategy. My reflection didn't blink back. It just waited, same as me. I walked back to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the Delta vendor file. Frank's direct cell was right at the top. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, then typed a subject line without thinking. Quick chat this week. I didn't send it yet. I just let it sit there. Because if I sent it, this stopped being frustration. It became action. And if I moved forward, there wouldn't be a rewind. But here's the truth. I already knew I'd send it. Because Kyle thought 12% was just a number. But to me, it was the receipt for his downfall. Frank met me at his usual haunt. A cracked leather booth at a no-name diner off Route 62 that smelled like burnt coffee and carburetor grease. He was already 2/3 through a BLT when I slid into the booth across from him. No handshakes, no greetings. Just a nod and a grunt that passed for hello in Frank essay. That's how you knew he trusted you. He didn't perform. Appreciate you making time, I said. He wiped mayo off his beard with a napkin that looked older than our supplier contract. Figured it wasn't just for the fries, he muttered. Let me guess. That suit you report to wants another pound of flesh. I didn't answer right away. Just stirred my iced tea, watching the lemon float like a lazy thought. I read the minutes from the last call, he said, voice gravelly. Your VP, what's his name? Kyle. Guy talks like a TED Talk crashed into a used car commercial. Every time he opens his mouth, I want to invoice him for wasting oxygen. I tried not to smile, but it escaped anyway. He leaned back, eyeing me with that half-suspicious squint he used when negotiating copper costs. Be honest with me. That 12% cut he's demanding. Does he even understand what that does to our margin? No, I said flatly. He just sees a percentage and thinks it makes him look sharp in front of the CFO. Frank let out a low, bitter laugh. Hell, I've been in this business longer than he's been shaving. He doesn't get that my guys don't work for free. He doesn't know we paid double on resins this year just to stay ahead of schedule. You remember that tornado down in Kentucky last spring? Yeah. Took out your secondary warehouse. Damn right it did. We still hit every delivery window. He stabbed a fry into a blob of ketchup like it owed him money. I did that for you. 'Cause I knew you'd make it right in Q3. And I knew you actually gave a damn. That hung between us a second. The clink of forks and tired voices of truckers in the next booth filled the air. And then I asked it. Quiet. Direct. Like dropping a wrench on a shop floor. Would you rather sell to someone who understands the business? Frank didn't answer immediately. He stared at me for a long time, lips pressed tight. The kind of look you give a bridge just before deciding if it'll hold your weight. Thought about it, he admitted finally. These last few years haven't been easy. Judy passed, the arthritis kicked up. My daughter keeps telling me to slow down and smell the damn roses. She's not wrong. He laughed softer now. Problem is, the offers I've gotten? All from suits who just want to flip the place. Gut it. Offload the machines to Taiwan and slap a new name on the door. That's not what I'm suggesting. I know. He picked at his crust like he was picking at old doubts. You always played it straight with me, even when it cost you internally. I leaned in slightly. You sell to one of those strip and flip types, your name's dead within a year. You sell to someone who respects what you built. It becomes legacy, not salvage. Frank's fingers tapped the Formica table, slow and rhythmic like he was measuring out the seconds of his career. I ain't giving you a yes today, he finally said. But I'll think about it. Come back next week with a number that doesn't insult me and a plan that doesn't ruin my people. I nodded. Fair. He slid out of the booth with a groan, joints protesting years of concrete floors and 4 a.m. shifts. Before he left, he turned and added, just so we're clear, I ain't doing this to screw your VP. I'm doing it so he doesn't get to screw me. I smiled, but there was no joy in it. Just clarity. Same reason I'm here, Frank. As he walked out, I sat there a moment longer, staring at the condensation running down my tea glass. A seed had been planted. And Kyle? He didn't even know a storm was coming. The day after that diner meeting, I poured myself a black coffee at 11:47 p.m., sat down in my home office, and started building the holding entity that would quietly wrap itself around Vendor Delta like a glove. No drama. No grand declarations. Just filings, PDFs, and a low hum of revenge. I registered the LLC in Indiana, Crossridge Holdings, named after a back road near my grandmother's farm. I listed my brother-in-law as the registered agent. He owed me 2 favors and didn't ask questions. That's why I picked him. On paper, it looked like a quiet family investment firm. Beneath the surface, it was the scalpel I'd been sharpening for months without knowing it. I wasn't driven by rage. That burned out years ago, when Kyle first started passing off my supplier models as his own. This was different. This was detachment. Cold. Surgical. I wasn't out for blood. I was out for leverage. By the end of the week, I had EIN approval, a business checking account, and a clean doc folder labeled Vendor Acquisition, Phase 1. I spent the next 7 nights reviewing Frank's books, quietly, meticulously, while the rest of the house slept. His margins were thinner than I expected. He'd been absorbing raw material cost hikes and shielding the company from freight volatility out of sheer loyalty to us. Loyalty Kyle had mistaken for weakness. Frank's staff payroll, equipment lease structure, and insurance premiums all landed in neat little rows on my second monitor. I built the buyout model in silence. Low-interest SBA-backed loan, 60-day close, full asset retention. Frank would walk away debt-free, with a consulting retainer and a title if he wanted it. Not out of pity, out of respect. He'd built something real. The least I could do was not let Kyle wreck it for sport. Meanwhile, on Slack, Kyle was playing the role of victorious gladiator. His latest gem posted in the OpsWins channel. We break vendors like war drums. Fire, just wait for Q4, folks. I want bone-on-bone pricing. For people laughed, reacted. One of them was our CFO. I didn't react at all. I just bookmarked it. That Slack channel was public. So was his ego. I knew Kyle hadn't read the Q3 vendor risk reports. If he had, he'd have seen the warning I'd slipped into the Delta supplier analysis. Dependency threshold exceeds tolerance without relationship continuity assurance. His eyes always glazed over once the chart stopped being pretty. The only person who noticed that line was legal, and she'd pinged me with a shrug emoji. As the buyout moved forward, I coordinated everything through a small regional business lawyer, an old friend who'd helped me close on my first house. We used burner emails and scheduled calls late at night. Every file we touched got scrubbed of metadata. Kyle had no idea Frank was talking to anyone, let alone that a holding firm was lining up an offer that would make him irrelevant. Still, I played my role. I joined the Tuesday procurement meeting and nodded when Kyle spewed his usual cliches. Low-hanging fruit, tighten the margins, bleed the fat. I updated spreadsheets. I sent follow-ups. I even congratulated him when he posted a photo from his cruise in the #offtopic channel. Him in a white linen shirt holding a margarita. Caption: Negotiator of the Year. Smiling face with sunglasses, money with wings. That same night, I finalized the term sheet. The numbers weren't flashy, but they were solid. Clean exit, no layoffs, and an advisory role that would keep Frank's team stable during transition. All signed under NDA, of course. By the end of the month, the deal would be done. Kyle thought he was tightening the noose on Delta. But all he was doing was loosening his grip on the only vendor that kept his slides from being fiction. And I was just quietly moving the strings. Not for glory. Not for applause. Just for the day he'd ask for his usual discount and have to talk to me instead. The pen clicked twice before Frank put it to paper. That was his tell. Like an old gunslinger checking his draw before a duel. We were back in the same diner, same booth, same bitter coffee and chipped mugs. The only difference was the air. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was final. He didn't say anything dramatic. No here goes nothing. No end of an era. Just signed his name in that jagged all-caps scrawl and slid the agreement across the table. I initialed where I needed to, signed twice, then tucked the folder into my bag like I was picking up groceries instead of changing the course of a company's supply chain. Frank leaned back and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since 1987. You sure about the consultant bit? I asked, even though we talked it through. He waved his hand like I was offering him a second helping of liver. 6 months. I'll keep the team steady, clean up whatever mess Kyle makes, then I'm fishing. And if anyone calls from your company, I don't answer unless it's you. I nodded. Fair enough. Just one thing, he added, rubbing his jaw. Don't let that shiny-haired bastard gut what we built. I won't. That was all that needed to be said. He stood slowly, back stiff, knees louder than they should be. Before walking out, he pulled his ball cap low over his brow and clapped my shoulder once. Not friendly. Not sentimental. Just final. After he left, I didn't linger. I paid the bill in cash, tipped more than I should have, and headed home through the gray Ohio drizzle. No music. Just windshield wipers and quiet. Back in my home office, I opened my laptop, created a new folder, and named it what it was. Q4 Pricing Response, Revised Ownership. I dragged the executed agreement inside, along with Frank's consulting contract, the new vendor compliance docs, and the letter of notice I'd be sending procurement. After the review, I didn't smile, didn't pour a drink. This wasn't a victory lap. This was alignment. The vendor Kyle thought he controlled, now reported to me. The supply lines he assumed were still under his boot? I was the floor beneath them now. And the best part? He had no clue. That week, Kyle was too busy flexing on LinkedIn, posting recycled Forbes quotes about strategic leadership, and bragging about supplier obedience, in a Slack thread he titled, How to Break a Backbone. I bookmarked it. Because soon, that thread would become a case study in how to snap your own neck by ignoring the quiet ones. Frank's team would keep operating as normal, only now under a new owner they hadn't even noticed in their payroll filings. Nothing changed externally. Trucks would still roll, invoices would still process, and Kyle would keep swinging his discount hammer like he was Thor with an MBA. But come review day, that hammer was going to meet reinforced steel. And this time it wouldn't budge. The Monday before the pricing review, Kyle sent out one of his infamous motivation memos. This one titled The Cost Killers Club. It was a masterpiece of ego and projection, CC to the entire ops team, plus legal and finance for what I can only assume was drama insurance. It opened with, not everyone on this team is pulling their weight, and that's okay. Some of you were born to lead supplier negotiations, and some of you were born to observe greatness. Then a bullet point list of reminders followed, including my personal favorite. Deadweight doesn't get us Q4 bonuses. Strategic aggression does. I scrolled past the rest. Didn't even blink. He was swinging wild now, lashing out preemptively like a man who sensed something was off, but didn't know where the threat was hiding. Classic Kyle. No facts, just posturing. He wanted blood in the water before the review, so he could walk into that meeting already holding the moral high ground, like a boxer taunting his opponent before the bell. What he didn't realize was that the bell had already rung. He just hadn't heard it yet. I didn't reply, didn't bite. I spent the rest of the day rebuilding the pricing deck from scratch. Not the glossy garbage Kyle loved to flash at meetings, but real numbers, clean, unforgiving, contract-backed figures that showed precisely what Delta's new ownership expected moving forward. I added a slide titled, Revised Terms and Governance Overview. It was the quiet equivalent of a loaded pistol placed gently on the table. Then I looped in my attorney, small firm guy, quiet, brilliant, and allergic to social media. We reviewed every clause in the existing vendor agreement, prepped notices, and secured legal verification of the sale. He even had me notarize the ownership transfer doc with a statement of beneficial interest tied to Crossridge Holdings, just in case Kyle decided to grow claws once the fallout started. I scheduled the review meeting for Friday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Subject line: Q4 supplier cost realignment. Final deck plus vendor participation confirmed. Invite list included procurement, finance, legal, and Kyle obviously. But I added 2 new names. Frank Martin, consultant, vendor Delta CC only. Madeline Pierce, counsel, Crossridge Holdings presenter. I didn't label them. Didn't explain. Just dropped them into the calendar like they'd always been there. The next day, Kyle pinged me on Slack. Kyle, make sure Delta brings that same energy this time. Tell Frank to leave his feelings at home. I want another double-digit reduction, or we find someone hungrier. I typed out a reply, then deleted it. Instead, I just marked the message as read, turned off my notifications, and returned to the deck. Line by line, I refined the talking points, deleted the fluff, tightened the language. There would be no ambiguity in that room. Only facts, ownership, and the contractually valid, legally recognized power shift Kyle didn't see coming. Outside, the fall wind rattled the glass. Inside, the room was still, focused, not vengeful, just ready. By Thursday night, everything was loaded: slides, contract appendices, legal notes, and a bulletproof Q&A list. No dramatics. No fireworks. But if Kyle thought Friday's meeting was business as usual, he was about to find out how quietly a system could change when the right hand stops shaking and starts writing its own rules. Monday, 8:59 a.m. My screen glowed with the reflection of my black coffee as the meeting room filled with the usual suspects: procurement, finance, legal, Kyle. He popped on right at 9, grinning like a man who thought he was 5 minutes away from a standing ovation. Let's make this quick, he said, adjusting his cufflinks on camera like they were watching. I've got the board debrief at 10, and I want to tell them we squeezed another win out of Delta. He didn't wait for pleasantries. Didn't ask who else was on the call. Just launched straight in with a voice full of rehearsed dominance. So, here's what we're expecting. Same base rates as last year, minus 6% for Q4 incentives, and an additional 3% if they want to stay top-tier vendor into the new fiscal year. That's a total of 9% savings. Standard expectations, no surprises. Then he paused, looked around, smug like a game show host waiting for applause. Is Frank even on? I unmuted. No, I said, my voice calm, low, deliberate. Vendor Delta will not be attending today. Kyle blinked once, confused. Before he could open his mouth, I continued. Instead, I've brought representation from their new ownership. That's when Madeline appeared on screen. Calm, crisp, wearing a charcoal blazer and a soft smile that looked polite until you really saw it. Good morning, she said. I'm counsel for Crossridge Holdings. As of last week, Crossridge is the full legal and operational owner of vendor Delta. Silence. Like real silence. No keyboard clicking. No background rustling. Just the slow death of whatever narrative Kyle had rehearsed for this meeting. Wait, he said, blinking rapidly. What do you mean new ownership? Madeline nodded once, professional but firm. Vendor Delta was privately acquired last week. All contracts, distribution rights, and pricing negotiations now run through us. The original executive, Mr. Martin, has transitioned to a consulting role. We're here to present the new terms. Finance shifted in their seats. Procurement's director went off camera, probably choking on her tea. Legal, finally alert, started scrolling through something furiously. Kyle. He froze. You could see the blood leave his face in real time. This wasn't disclosed, he stammered. This is highly irregular. We've had a working relationship with Frank for over a decade. I leaned in slightly, just enough to cast a shadow over my own camera. And you spent the last year treating him like a doormat, I said. Calm. Measured. You wanted a new cost structure. Well, here it is. Madeline shared her screen. A new pricing document replaced Kyle's slides. Clean layout. 3 tiers. No double-digit discounts. In fact, base rates were up 4% across the board, aligned with market benchmarks and revised freight costs. Every line backed by hard data and legal footing. These terms reflect both the current economic environment and the value of guaranteed supply chain continuity, Madeline explained. Vendor Delta's on-time delivery rating is 99.4%, well above your other Tier 1 suppliers. Any attempt to terminate or rebid the contract would trigger a 6-month ramp period and significant operational risk. Kyle opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, like a fish gasping for a comeback. I wasn't aware of this, he managed. Why wasn't I notified? Because, I said, you never read the vendor dependency reports. Or the risk notes. Or the line about relationship continuity assurance. You were too busy writing Slack posts about breaking spines. Legal chimed in, voice cautious. These documents are valid. I've reviewed the ownership transfer and counsel credentials. We need to pause and reassess before rejecting anything outright. Kyle looked at me, not with anger, but something worse. Recognition. That this moment had been orchestrated. That the system he'd used as a personal trampoline now belonged to someone else. We'll need to loop in the CFO, he said quietly. You do that, I said. Then I clicked mute. Let the silence speak for me. Across the screen, nobody smiled. But they all knew the shift had happened. Quiet. Clean. Total. By Tuesday, the panic had teeth. Procurement flagged a 14% spike in component costs across 3 product lines, all tied to Vendor Delta. Suddenly, Kyle's aggressive Q4 target spreadsheet didn't just look optimistic, it looked delusional. His graphs collapsed like a house built on bad faith and buzzwords. The finance team started rerunning projections. Margins didn't just shrink, they vanished. Products slated for market disruption were now projected to break even, if we were lucky. By Wednesday, the CFO's tone shifted from puzzled to pissed. He called an emergency sync and asked point blank, why weren't we briefed on the vendor ownership change? No one answered. Kyle stammered something about operational blind spots and unplanned stakeholder realignment. I said nothing, just sat there, watching him unravel in real time, a slow-motion car wreck of corporate arrogance meeting reality. But it got worse. Legal surfaced an email I'd sent to Kyle 6 weeks prior, flagged high importance. Subject: Vendor Delta, risk exposure plus continuity contingency. I'd even bolded the key line. Recommend exec-level review of supplier transition scenarios. Delta leadership considering succession options. Kyle never replied. Never even opened the attachment. There was another one too. An internal vendor analysis I'd submitted in Q3 that stated plainly, dependency concentration at 62%. Recommend stakeholder continuity plan before fiscal rollover. It had been filed, time-stamped, and ignored. By Thursday, procurement was in full damage control. They tried to approach alternate vendors for key components, but Frank's team had the specs, the patents, and the tooling. No one else could fulfill within our lead time window. Not without a 9-month setup delay. And suddenly, that consultant clause Frank signed? It didn't look like redundancy, it looked like a firewall. Someone forwarded me a Slack thread from Kyle's pet analyst. Is it true Crossridge owns Delta now? And who even is Crossridge? Another replied, no idea, but legal's treating them like royalty. Friday morning, I came in early. No fanfare. Just grabbed a coffee and opened the new vendor performance dashboard. Clean handoff. Fulfillment on time. Quality score untouched. Only difference? We were paying rates that reflected actual value. At 9:17 a.m., a quiet ripple passed through the floor. HR had just disabled Kyle's badge. He'd shown up late, tried to tap in at the east entrance, and the reader lit up red. He stood there for a few seconds, probably thinking it was a tech glitch, until security approached and handed him a sealed envelope. I didn't see it happen, but the facilities guy told me Kyle just stood there blinking for a while, then walked out without a word. The CFO never said my name during the next exec meeting, but he did pull me aside in the break room, handed me a copy of the revised cost strategy deck, and muttered, "If I'd known what you were building, I'd have backed you from day one." I didn't say I tried. I just nodded, because by then, Kyle was already gone, and I was the one holding the map. We met at a different diner this time. Nicer one, tucked between a bank and a bookstore, with real tablecloths and menus that didn't stick to your fingers. Frank wore a button-down that still had the store's crease lines, and kept muttering about how expensive the iced tea was. My lawyer, Madeline, was already halfway through her salad when I sat down. She nodded at me like always. "One part respect, one part steel. Contract number 3 signed this morning," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Midwestern Automotive. 5-year deal. Better payment terms than Delta ever had with your old employer." Frank let out a low whistle, then reached for the bread basket like we'd just closed on a skyscraper. Hell, they were too slow to see the value. "Now you're eating their lunch." He grinned. "And ordering dessert." I didn't gloat. Just opened the folder, scanned the signatures, and nodded once. That was client number 3. All of them clean. All of them steady. All of them the kind of clients Kyle never had the patience to earn. Crossridge Holdings wasn't just real now. It was humming. 3 months ago it was an LLC with a single vendor. Now it was a supply and risk management firm with its own small legal team, an operations assistant, and a vendor fulfillment model so clean our former procurement VP emailed me congrats from her personal Gmail. I never updated my LinkedIn. Let the ghost of senior pricing analyst sit there collecting digital dust while Kyle's profile quietly disappeared into silence. No grand posts. No article write-ups. Just one small change, my email footer. Principal Crossridge Holdings. Strategic Supply and Risk Management. That was enough. I paid the check in cash, let Frank complain about the tip, and left Madeline with a folder of contracts to review before next Tuesday. On the sidewalk, the sun cut through the clouds and warmed the back of my neck. It wasn't dramatic, just present. A few days later, I cleaned out the last folder on my home desktop. The original spreadsheet that started it all, Kyle's discount demands and his Q4 leverage targets. I dragged it to the recycle bin, hovered for a second, then clicked empty. They thought silence was surrender. That a $2 lottery ticket was the cost of 10 years of grit. That I'd take humiliation and call it gratitude. They gave me a lottery ticket. I gave them new terms.